Please take a seat. What an honor it is for me to be here and to kick off the live speakers today. As a woman in STEM, though I'm only at the cusp of launching my career, I'm often identified by my qualifications. In this line of work, that sometimes takes the form of, how many letters do you have behind your name? Or, how many scientific articles have you published? People also remember female leaders in STEM by their sole discoveries and awards. Though I think we can all agree that their achievements are something to be grateful for, I know that they, like many of us, had to work really hard to get to that point in their careers that warranted recognition. In fact, these female pioneers paved the way for our generation of women in science by courageously facing adversity on a variety of levels that are just unfathomable in this day and age. What I find most interesting, though, is that we have a very strong tendency to overlook the individual experiments in science and in our lives, instead focusing on the end result and discoveries, which are easier to see. It's easier to appreciate the things that we can see, like things that are black and white. Growing up, I was the exact same way. I always loved science and experiments because this is how I saw them. Easy, simple, black and white. You see a problem, you identify a hypothesis, you design experiments to answer said hypothesis, and then you analyze the data results to either confirm or reject that hypothesis. In my mind, this was a logical, straightforward path. The results were either right or wrong, black or white. My childhood self believed that the real purpose and joy in life was to prove myself right. Because who doesn't like to be right? Am I right? Much to my surprise, real science doesn't usually work this way. And as you all probably know, neither does life. Now, my notion of what science is really like was turned upside down when I was a Ph.D. candidate at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. The focus of my project was to design an alternative treatment strategy for high blood pressure. This is also known as hypertension, and it's really important for us to recognize that this is a chronic condition that affects nearly 1 in every 3 American adults. So our lab was working with a nanoformulated compound, which we hypothesized based on its nano size and favorable chemical properties would decrease blood pressure by targeting an organ widely implicated in the control of hypertension, the brain. After months and months of collecting data, we did confirm that this compound did in fact decrease elevated blood pressure in an animal model. However, and you always know there's a however, close inspection revealed that our nano compound meant to target the brain was not quite getting to the brain. So where the heck was it going? The kidney? I distinctly remember thinking to myself, oh no, it's going to the kidney? I mean, sure, the kidneys are really important, and they're very complex, but one of their main functions is to excrete waste. Was our alternative drug simply being excreted as waste? Perhaps, but there was no doubt that it was also working as we had intended, because it did, in fact, significantly decrease blood pressure. So while the results of this experiment were genuinely unexpected and somewhat misaligned with our original hypothesis, the underlying reality of these experiments was that they opened up a whole new avenue of possibilities for the future of this project. And what's more is that These experiments may have implications for improving the way that we treat hypertension in the future. Now, my experience with how science really works was initially traumatic. I mean, it just didn't align with my childhood expectation of what it should be like. You know, the answers aren't always right or wrong, black and white. And experiments don't always go according to plan. In fact, they rarely go as planned. But it was when I realized that there's no real end game in science that I came to learn and accept that it wasn't so much of a disaster. There will always be questions that need to be answered and problems that need to be solved. And it's during the process of troubleshooting these individual experiments that real learning, creativity, and satisfaction occur. Now, isn't that one of the purposes of life as well? When I heard that the theme for this event was momentum, my initial thought, of course, went here, to the scientific equation for momentum. P equals m times v. In other words, momentum equals mass times velocity. When I think about what gives us momentum, it's really impossible to do so without first defining our mass. Our mass is more than our weight, thank God. It's more than the way that we walk and talk. It's even more than our values and our beliefs. It encompasses the experiences that we choose to have and those experiences which are forced upon us. It also includes all of the people in our lives, because these people, let's face it, they shape our perspective, sometimes by telling us things that we want to hear, and often by telling us things and challenging us with the things that we don't necessarily want to hear. You all know what I mean, right? So the pieces of our mass, are everything that make up who we are and help us to define our purpose. The other half of the equation, though, is equally important because it allows us to drive our mass and thereby gives our momentum direction. Velocity is often defined by speed, but there are times in our lives where we can't control the exact speed at which we're going. For example, in science, experiments that utilize animal models can be designed to take place over the course of hours or months. So trust me, there are times in our lives where we really don't feel like we're moving at all. But realize that we are always moving, it's just a matter of how fast. And what's most important for us to recognize is that velocity has direction, and we get to choose. Yes, it's a choice, whether we are propelling forwards or backwards in our life's journey, using our mass made up of the good or the bad, the intended and the unexpected, what we choose, and sometimes what is chosen for us. Allow me to explain. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked the question, did you always know you wanted to be a doctor, meaning MD physician and Ph.D. scientist? And the answer is, not really. I may have had an idea that I wanted to be a doctor, because growing up, I always loved science. But I didn't exactly know what kind of doctor I wanted to be, nor did I exactly know why. It was as if my passion for science didn't have a defined or directed purpose. In fact, it was something else entirely, something unplanned, unexpected, and undesired, a detour, if you will, that put me on the path that I'm on today. It was 1 week into my senior year of college, and I was driving down the freeway in California. I remember seeing headlights coming on to the tail end of my car very quickly. My car was immediately struck from behind by a drunk driver. Now, the force of this impact on my car, the momentum of this impact, sent my automobile with me still inside of it, tumbling 2.5 times down a hill and into a ditch. My Pathfinder landed on its roof side, with me still strapped into the driver's seat, hanging upside down. I remember holding my breath for what seemed like an eternity, and I thought to myself, am I dead? Now, as horrible as this car crash was, this accident was not the worst thing that could have happened to me. I could have been dead or severely injured. Thankfully, my physical injuries were minimal. My mental and emotional state of mind, however, well, that was a much different story. It took years where I allowed this trauma, this single trauma, this small piece of my mass to weigh me down. What's worse is that I had convinced myself that this car crash had crushed my momentum. Though I wasn't dead, it took a long time to realize that I also wasn't living, at least not the life that I wanted for myself. It was when I had that realization that I was able to turn this trauma into a pivotal driver of my life's momentum. In fact, it was this car crash that motivated me to work with patients who had undergone significant traumatic brain injuries. After all, hadn't I nearly escaped one myself? And it was that work that allowed me to see firsthand how scientific research and exploration and discovery could impact clinical care and, what's most important, the lives of patients in a very meaningful way. Maybe a piece of your mass is a car accident, or the loss of a loved one, or battling an addiction. Maybe it's failing to meet your own expectations. Or perhaps you made a mistake and chose to ignore the consequences of your actions. You see, we all have something that we can choose to acknowledge. A moment, a failure, a plan gone awry, that we can choose to turn into our momentum, which propels us forward. Now, this begs the question, how do we actually control our velocity and take ownership of our own momentum? Well, I was lucky enough to find a female mentor early on in my career, and Dr. Nolan once said to me, "Krupa, you have got to learn how to toot your own horn because no one else is going to do it for you." And she was right. After all, isn't this what the female pioneers in STEM had to do in order to pave the way? It was when I learned how to be my own best advocate that I was able to get back into that driver's seat and take control of my own momentum. I empowered myself with the resources and the tools that I needed to move toward where I wanted to be, which was pursuing a higher education in both science and medicine. Now, this pursuit was not without its detours as well. It took many applications and reapplications, and then finally, 3 years after my car accident, this gal from New Jersey who went to college in California landed herself right here in the good life of Nebraska. And I was able to enroll in a program that allowed me to pursue my passion in science with both purpose and direction. Now, as our lives evolve, it's inevitable that our mass and velocity are also evolving variables. But if momentum equals mass times velocity, this ensures that our momentum never truly goes away. It's never lost, and it's never crushed. But is that forward marching momentum sustainable 100% of the time? I think from the outside, looking in, at the black and white glimpses of other people's lives that we see, we often perceive that it is. I look at powerful and successful women in the STEM fields and elsewhere, and often catch myself thinking, how do they do it? How are they so strong, so relentless, so courageous all the time? To be honest, I don't actually think that they are. And what's more is that I don't think they should be. I think, just like you and me, their momentum comes from their experiences of failure and success, trauma and harmony, disappointment and encouragement. As neurobiologist Rita Levi-Montalcini once said, above all, don't fear difficult moments. The best comes from them. So you see, there's great value in experimenting with our experiences, but we must remember to appreciate the individual experiments in our lives instead of just simply looking at the end result and discoveries. It's in that troubleshooting process where we can creatively learn how to navigate detours, which help us to get to where we ultimately want to be. As a scientist and a student, I've been trained to ask thoughtful questions and then execute experiments to answer those questions. As in life, sometimes things just don't go according to plan. Often, the results simply aren't the ones that we wanted. In science, we have an ethical duty to follow that data. But in our lives, we have a choice. So you see, our mass may try to send us tumbling down a hill. It may try to send us to the kidney instead of to the brain. But mass doesn't tell the whole story. We can choose the direction of our velocity, and ultimately, we can courageously drive our own momentum. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Whew. Thank you. Thank you.